camp on the lake in Maine that every now and then we'd get a nice summer thunderstorm, and with the mountains there in Maine and the lake, many times the thunder would really roll, and you'd hear it echo and bounce along for a little while. And when I was little, my grandfather would say, "God is bowling." And then there'd be really loud when he said, "Oh, that sounded like a strike." But God is bowling. And I think it was something that he would say because it was related to God, and yet also at the same time, because I was a little kid, sometimes we think of thunder as a little bit scary. It certainly is loud, can be loud, and it can be scary, but also it can be kind of nice. I know for some people they say that they really enjoy the sound of a summer thunderstorm and enjoy that sound. So it can be scary, or it can be kind of nice. Let's look at John chapter 12. John chapter 12. John chapter 12, I'll start with verse 23. John 12, starting with verse 23. Jesus answered them, saying, "The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified." As Jesus' death is soon approaching, he says it's time for him to be glorified. And then at the end of his thing here that he says, verse 27, he says, "Now is my soul troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour?" No, he's not going to say that. But for this cause came I unto this hour.
Amen.
Jesus' life, he's not scared. He knows that God has been guiding him and that he's not wanting deliverance from what's coming, but he knows that that's his reason for being there. That's his work. And so in verse 28, he prays, "Father, glorify thy name."
Amen.
Verse 28, "Then there came a voice from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." There in verse 28, Jesus prays and asks that God's name will be glorified. That's Jesus' work that he wants to do. I think it's the work for each one of us as well. Praying that God will be glorified, and then there's a voice from heaven. There's a voice. That's something clear and understandable. There's a voice, and it's from heaven, so who would this be? It'd be God the Father. And then says, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." Verse 29, "The people therefore that stood by and heard it said that it thundered. Others said an angel spake to him." So verse 29, the people nearby. There is a crowd around Jesus as he speaks usually. Certainly true this time here. And so here he is in Jerusalem speaking, and there's a crowd of people that are nearby. But not all of them around can hear it. Right? Not all of them around it can hear it, because in the verse here it says, "The people therefore that stood nearby and heard it," that means that there were some standing nearby who never heard it.
Right.
So there's a crowd there. Not all heard it. Some heard nothing. Some said that it thundered. So some of the people there in the crowd said, "I heard thunder." Look up at the sky, look around at the clouds. They heard thunder. Some said an angel spoke. It was something an angel spoke. It was something that they couldn't understand. So they said it kind of sounded like talking. Sometimes you hear another language and there's talking, but you have no idea what they're saying.
Right.
And so they said it sounded like an angel speaking. Couldn't understand it. But obviously some could hear and understand. John was there. He's the one who's writing the gospel here. John could hear it. He could understand. There were others as well who could hear it and understand God the Father say, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." Thunder in the Bible, like we read in our scripture reading, there is a symbol. Sometimes thunder in the Bible is the voice of God. So sometimes thunder in the Bible is the voice of God. Here's a few examples. Exodus chapter 9. Exodus chapter 9. Exodus 9, I'll go to verse 23. This is in the middle of the plagues. And here's one of the plagues here. Exodus 9, verse 23. Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, And the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground. And the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. So that's during the plague of hail, but notice what also comes with that plague of hail. Thunder and fire. Talk about the fire some other day, but looking at thunder here. So here's this plague of hail. The hail is coming down, and there's thunder with it. But notice how it's described a little bit later. Verse 28. Exodus chapter 9, verse 28. Pharaoh here talks to Moses, and Pharaoh says, "Entreat the Lord, for it is enough that there be no more mighty thunderings and hail, and I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer." So this is King James Version here. "Entreat the Lord, for it's enough that there be no more mighty thunderings." In Hebrew, this would be voices of God. Do any of you have something besides thunder? Does any of your versions say voice of God in there? All right. In Hebrew, it would be voices of God. And so thunder and voices of God are combined together here. And then verse 29, Moses said to him, "As soon as I'm gone out from the city, I'll spread abroad my hands unto the Lord, and the thunder shall cease. Neither shall there be any more hail, that thou mayest know how the earth is the Lord's." So there's thunder, and it's the voice of God as this hail is coming down. God is sending the hail, thunder, fire, and God is saying, "No, this is my judgment on Egypt because of their wickedness." Exodus chapter 19, not too far away. Exodus chapter 19, verse 16 here. This is right after the Israelites have gotten out of the land of Egypt. They're out of the land of Egypt. They're now at Mount Sinai. And here they are about to receive the Ten Commandments. Exodus chapter 19, verse 16. "And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled." Would you like to hear that trumpet? You'll hear it again. You will hear it again.
Amen.
All right, and there's this voice of a trumpet, and here's this thunders. It says thunders and lightning. And the voice of the trumpet loud. And so everybody can hear it, and they're shaking with the thunder, the lightning, the trumpet sound. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. So there they are, Mount Sinai, and they're standing there listening. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. Verse 19, "And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice." So here's Mount Sinai, smoking, burning, thunders and lightning, and the sound of a trumpet, and the sound of the trumpet is getting louder and louder and louder. This is not the priest blowing on a trumpet somewhere. This is a sound coming from God, coming from God's throne, and it's getting louder and louder. It's a supernatural noise, which means that it can get louder and louder and louder. And here the trumpet is getting louder, and I don't know if Moses just holds back for a minute or two more, let it get a little bit louder, and the people are shaking, and then finally Moses says, "We're here." And then God speaks. And so there's this sound of thunder. It's the sound of thunder that is the sound of God speaking. Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 and 19. Right after the Ten Commandments have been spoken, verse 18. As soon as the Ten Commandments have been spoken, Exodus chapter 20, verse 18, "All the people saw the thunders and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, and when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off." And so as they've been standing there at Mount Sinai, the thunder, the lightning, the trumpet sound, they've been standing there, and then God has spoken the Ten Commandments, and as He has spoken, they're backing up. And so they're moving slowly backwards, quite afraid, and as they're backing up, the people have removed and stood afar off. So they've backed up as much as they can here during this time. And verse 19, "They said to Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." They heard that thunder and they knew that that was the voice of God. And so with that thunder and with God speaking, they just couldn't listen to it anymore. Just too scary. Psalm 29, where the call to worship was. Psalm 29, look at this again. Psalm 29, give unto the Lord, O ye mighty, give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is upon many waters. So what's the sound of God speaking? It's like thunder, like a rolling thunder as it goes across lakes and bounces through the mountains there. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. That's verse 4 there. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. Yea, the Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. And so here it has this voice of the Lord, and what happens when God speaks? He can break something when he speaks. He can divide flames of fire. He can shake the wilderness. He can make the cows give birth. And in his temple, everyone speaks of his glory. There's great glory and power with him. And then verse 10 and 11, as we finish the psalm, the Lord sits upon the flood. Yea, the Lord sits king forever. The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace.
Amen.
So in spite of that thundering sound of the voice of God, and all the power that goes with the voice of God, God's people find it to be a peaceful sound. That's the sound of God speaking, and they can enjoy that as they hear God's thunder. They can hear God's guidance, and it gives them peace. God's voice, that voice of thunder, should give us guidance, and it should give us peace. Now let's go to Revelation. We've been focusing on Revelation this month with Unlocked Revelation. Let's look at some verses here in Revelation now. Revelation chapter 4, 1 through 5. Revelation chapter 4, starting with verse 1. After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And a first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet, talking with me, which said, Come up here, and I will show you things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper, and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And round about the throne were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. So there, in this vision that John has of God's throne, there he sees the glory, the brightness, and the sound that he hears is the sound of thunder and voices. There's God speaking there as he looks at God's throne. Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. And when I saw the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, Come and see. So as the Lamb, that's Jesus, opens the seal, there's the voice of thunder. Who's guiding God's church through the seals? Who's watching over God's people? Jesus. God himself there. And so there's this voice of thunder as he opens up the seals. Some of these things can sound kind of good. Some of them sound really quite scary. But through it all, God is one speaking and directing as they go through it. And so there's that voice of thunder. This is probably the same for seals 2 through 6. We have it listed in the first seal that God opens it, and there's the voice of thunder, God's voice, but probably true for the other seals as well, seals 2 through 6. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. Revelation 8, I'll read verses 1 through 5. When he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. So probably for that 7th seal, it sounds like there's no voice of God there yet. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there were given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. Verse 5. And the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and cast it into the earth, and there were voices, and thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. So here, as the seventh seal happens here, and here we start the closer probation, it's the censer's thrown down, and then there's this voices and thunders. Probably what is said is something similar to Revelation 22, verse 11. Because the censer is thrown down, that means that the time of intercession is over. The prayers of the saints have gone up, and intercession is now over. Probably what is spoken is similar to Revelation 22, verse 11. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He which is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still. So those thunderings, it may be God speaking, saying, all right, close our probation now. This is the way it's going to be. Revelation 11, verse 19, there's thunder. 14, verse 2, there's thunder there as well. It's the voice from heaven, and there's thunder that goes with it. Chapter 16 as well, there's this voice from heaven, and then there's thunder that goes with it. Then Revelation chapter 19, again, verses 5 and 6, a voice from heaven, praise God, and then there's the voice of thunder, the sound of thunder that goes with it. But I want to look now at Revelation chapter 10, looking at these verses here. Revelation chapter 10, verse 1. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. Remember, angel means messenger. This messenger is God himself, Jesus, bringing this message. So this is Jesus' message. This is Jesus coming down with this message that he has. Look at this description. Face as the sun, feet as pillars of fire, and a rainbow around his head. That's Jesus there. Amen. Verse 2, he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea and his left foot on the earth. Here's this message that Jesus has, and he's bringing the message from the book of Daniel. So the book of Daniel is there, and it's for places that are populated or places with little population. This message needs to go everywhere. Amen. So he brings his message here. Verse 3, and cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. So when a lion roars, that's a mighty sound. Barbara Eden, the actress from I Dream of Jeannie, said that one day she was on the set, and there was a lion that was part of the episode there. And so when she saw it, she said to her co-star, she said, Larry, we have to go make friends with the lion. And she had worked with a lion in some other thing some other time. So she knew that she needed to pet the lion and not touch his ears, but be right behind his ears. And she knew what to do and what to say and how to do that. So she was there, and she went and made friends with the lion. And Larry said, I'm not making friends with any lion. So he was gone somewhere else. And everybody prepared for this scene. So there's cameras, cameramen, sound men, and Barbara there with the lion. Larry, the co-star, comes in, and every guy is there. And because this is quite a while ago, it was only men there and Barbara and the lion. And so while they were there, she says that she was petting him, she fed him his raw meat, and for some reason the lion let out a roar. Didn't go anywhere, but there was a mighty roar that the lion made, and she said, and everybody left. She said they all disappeared in an instant. They broke a camera in the process, dropped equipment, knocked over other things. And she said, and the lion was there and purring and just putting his head down in my lap, and I kept petting him. Wow. That sound of a lion roaring is just a scary, scary sound, if you're not friends with it. And so there's that scary sound. It could be the voice of thunder, or it could be a pleasant sound if we know who it is. So then verse 4, and when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which are the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. So here's 7 thunders here in verse 4, and it's 7 things that God says, and it's totally understandable for John. He totally understands it because as he hears it, it's understandable, and he's about to write it down. You can't write it down if you don't understand. And so he's about to write it down and write out these things, and this is great stuff that he's heard, and then he's told you better not write it. Let me read a couple of quotes here that will give us some ideas as to what was said at that time. This is from Great Controversy, page 637. Great Controversy, page 637. This is probably one of those thunders that John heard. Thick clouds cover the sky, yet the sun now and then breaks through, appearing like the avenging eye of Jehovah. This is right after the special resurrection, just before Jesus comes. Fierce lightnings leap from the heavens, enveloping the earth in a sheet of flame. Above the terrific roar of thunder, voices, mysterious and awful, declare the doom of the wicked. The words spoken are not comprehended by all, but they are distinctly understood by the false teachers. Those who a little before were so reckless, so boastful and defiant, so exultant in their cruelty to God's commandment-keeping people, are now overwhelmed with consternation and shudder in fear. Their wails are heard above the sound of the elements. Demons acknowledge the deity of Christ and tremble before his power, while men are supplicating for mercy and groveling in abject terror. It's probably one of the seven thunders there. This voice from God, very terrifying for those who don't want to hear or who are not ready to hear. Page 640, second paragraph, not too far away here. Great Controversy, page 640. The voice of God is heard from heaven, declaring the day and hour of Jesus' coming, and delivering the everlasting covenant to his people. Like peals of loudest thunder, his words roll through the earth. The Israel of God stand listening with their eyes fixed upward. Their countenances are lighted up with his glory, and shine as did the face of Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai. The wicked cannot look upon them, and when the blessing is pronounced on those who have honored God by keeping his Sabbath holy, there is a mighty shout of victory.
Amen.
There's that voice of God. It's a wonderful sound for those who are ready for him. It's that voice of God. It's guidance and blessing for his people. It's a good sound. Verse 5 here from Revelation chapter 10. The angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and swear by him that lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are therein, and the earth and the things that are therein, and the sea and the things that are therein, that there should be time no longer. There should be time no longer. This is 1844 and afterwards. Here's this message that's applying now. Notice how it's also related to creation. 1844 is the year when Darwin wrote his theory. He didn't publish it at that time, but it's when he wrote his theory, and that was becoming more popular. And it's also the time when Jesus has said that he's moving in the most holy place of the sanctuary, beginning his work. Sabbath is the issue. And so here's this voice here. Verse 7. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God shall be finished, as he has declared to his servants, the prophets. It's time to finish the mystery of God. After 1844, time to finish the mystery of God. The mystery of God, how can sinners become holy like God? How can sinners become holy like God? That's a mystery, and that's the mystery of God. Verse 8, and a voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel, which stands upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it, eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. As we read and understand Daniel, it's a wonderful message. For those early pioneers, William Miller and those folks back in that day, as they read and they understood Daniel, they said, Jesus is coming again soon. It's from the Bible. We know it's true. And it was sweet. But how quickly it became bitter. Verse 10, I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. There was just a few years of preaching. William Miller started preaching in the 1830s, just 10 years or so of big preaching, just a couple of years of mass movement preaching before 1844. So just a few years of preaching before 1844. You know, when you eat something, you can eat something really nice and it tastes great and you chew it for a minute or two, right? And you swallow it, and how long do you have to deal with that stomach ache? It's a little while, right? So here's this message from Daniel. A few years of wonderful preaching, wonderful feeling, but then there's a disappointment that is bitter and hard to get over. And you know, we have the same thing. We have the same thing. We have this message from Daniel. We have this message from God, and we preach it. We love it. And yet at the same time, there is a bitter disappointment that we are still waiting for Jesus to come. From 1844, we've been hoping that it's sometime very soon, probably in the next year or two. And yet, it continues to be a little bit longer. And so there's a bitter disappointment that we go with. Even as we preach our message, even as we preach right now, Unlock Revelation, there is some disappointment that we don't have more listening. There is some disappointment that people come to the meetings and then they leave. There is some disappointment there, but verse 11, he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. We must prophesy again. We must keep on preaching. We must keep on preaching. We have this message, and it's a message from Jesus. He's the one who brings it there in verse 1. This message from Jesus, it's the voice of God, and we must speak it and preach it. That voice, that thunder, is God's guidance. It's His blessings, and it will bring us peace. And we must continue to preach. Our closing hymn is number 598. Hymn 598. Dear Jesus, we look forward to your soon return. We look forward to seeing you. We look forward to hearing your voice. But until then, I ask that you'll guide us, that you'll direct us, that you'll speak through us as we preach the message that you have given us. Amen.
Amen.